The old rancher sat in his lawyer's office, staring at the papers in front of him. He was 58 years old, owned one of the biggest cattle ranches in Montana, and had more money than he could spend in 3 lifetimes. But none of that seemed to matter anymore. Not since his wife passed away 2 years ago. The house felt too big now, too quiet. His children kept calling, saying he needed help. They worried about him living alone on that massive property. At first he'd refused. He was perfectly capable of taking care of himself, thank you very much. But they wouldn't stop pestering him. So here he was, looking at a contract for live-in help. His lawyer adjusted his glasses and pointed at the document. She comes highly recommended. Been through a tough time herself. Lost her husband to cancer about 8 months ago. She's 45, hardworking, and needs a fresh start. The rancher nodded slowly. The woman's name was on the contract along with her duties. She'd manage the household, cook meals, help with ranch paperwork and administration. In return, she'd get a private room, all her meals, and a salary that was more than fair. It all looked good on paper. Too good, maybe. The thing was, the rancher had been fooled before. About 10 years back, he'd hired a helper who seemed perfect. Friendly, efficient, trustworthy. 3 months later, he discovered the man had been slowly stealing from him. Not big things at first, small amounts of cash, some tools. Then it got worse. By the time the rancher caught on, thousands of dollars worth of equipment had vanished. Since then, he'd become careful. Some might say suspicious. His children called him paranoid, but he called it smart. He signed the papers anyway. His kids were right about one thing. He did need help around the house. The place was falling apart without his wife's touch. Dust covered everything. He ate frozen dinners most nights. The ranch records were a mess because he kept forgetting to file things properly. But he wasn't going to be a fool again. As he drove home that afternoon, an idea formed in his mind. A test. Something that would show him who this woman really was when she thought nobody was watching. He'd seen enough people put on fake smiles and good behavior when they knew the boss was around. But what did they do when they thought they were alone? That was the real measure of a person's character. He spent the weekend preparing. The woman would arrive Monday morning. He made sure there were a few valuable items in plain sight. Nothing too obvious, but things that would tempt someone with bad intentions. A nice watch left on the kitchen counter, some cash in an unlocked drawer. His late wife's jewelry box sitting on the dresser, not hidden away. He also made sure his study was positioned just right. The door would be open enough that someone in the kitchen could see inside. The leather chair faced at an angle where he could watch through barely opened eyes without being obvious about it. Sunday night, he barely slept. Part of him felt guilty about the whole thing. What if she was genuine? What if she really was just a widow trying to rebuild her life? And here he was setting traps like she was some kind of criminal. But the other part of him, the part that remembered being stolen from, the part that had been hurt too many times, said he had to know. Better to find out now than months down the road. Monday morning came with gray skies and a cold wind. He saw her car pull up the long driveway around 9 o'clock. From the window, he watched her get out. She was smaller than he'd expected. She lifted one worn suitcase from the trunk. Just one. That was all she'd brought. He opened the door before she could knock. She had tired eyes but a warm smile. "Good morning. I'm so grateful for this opportunity." He showed her around the property. The main house was huge, built by his grandfather 70 years ago. 6 bedrooms, a massive kitchen, a dining room that could seat 20 people. Then there was the barn, the stables, the equipment sheds, and the bunkhouse where the ranch hands stayed during busy season. As they walked through the house, he watched her reactions. She didn't gasp at the expensive furniture or the big screen television. She didn't ask about the value of things. Instead, she stopped at the family photos on the wall. "Your wife was beautiful," she said softly, looking at a picture from their 30th anniversary. "You can see the love in this photo. The way you're looking at each other." Something in his chest tightened. Most people avoided mentioning his wife, like talking about her would make him sad. But this woman spoke about her naturally, respectfully. He showed her to her room. It was small but comfortable, with its own bathroom and a window overlooking the east pasture. She set down her suitcase and looked around. "This is perfect," she said. "More than I expected." "Thank you." They spent the rest of the day going over her duties and the ranch schedule. She asked good questions, took notes, paid attention to everything he said. She cooked lunch, nothing fancy, just sandwiches and soup, but it was the first home-cooked meal he'd had in weeks. By evening, he almost felt bad about his plan. She seemed genuine, kind, real. But he'd been fooled by genuine before. After dinner, he told her he had some paperwork to do in his study. She nodded and began cleaning up the kitchen. He walked into his study, leaving the door partially open, and settled into his leather chair. The position was perfect. If he tilted his head just right and kept his eyes barely open, he could see into the kitchen. But from her angle, he'd look like he'd fallen asleep. He regulated his breathing, deep and steady, his hands relaxed on the armrests. To anyone looking, he'd appear to be an old man who dozed off after a long day. Now he would see who she really was. The test had begun, and whatever happened in the next hour would tell him everything he needed to know about the woman he'd just welcomed into his home. The rancher kept his breathing slow and steady, fighting every urge to peek properly at what was happening in the kitchen. He could hear the sound of running water, dishes clinking, cabinet doors opening and closing. Normal sounds. The sounds his wife used to make in the evening while he read the paper or watched the news. He heard the woman humming softly. Not a song he recognized, just a gentle melody. It was oddly comforting. The house had been silent for so long. Even when his children visited, they were always on their phones, texting, checking emails. The quiet had become heavy, oppressive. This was different. This was the sound of someone living, not just existing. Through his barely open eyelids, he could see her moving around the kitchen. She was efficient but not rushed. She wiped down the counters, put away the dishes, organized things that had been sitting in random places for months. She found the proper homes for items he'd just been setting wherever there was space. Now came the real test. She'd finished with the kitchen. What would she do next? His heart rate picked up slightly, though he kept his breathing even. This was the moment people usually showed their true colors. When they thought they were alone, when the boss was asleep and vulnerable. The woman walked past his study door. He could hear her footsteps pause. She was looking at him. He could feel her gaze. Every muscle in his body wanted to tense up, but he forced himself to stay relaxed. An old man, sleeping peacefully after dinner. Nothing suspicious about that. Her footsteps moved away, heading toward the living room. He heard her moving around but couldn't see what she was doing from his angle. Was she looking through drawers? Checking out the valuables? His jaw clenched slightly. Then he heard a different sound. Something sliding. She was moving furniture? No, wait. That was the sound of something being pulled out from behind something else. The big bookshelf, maybe? Or the cabinet? Minutes passed. The rancher's neck was starting to ache from holding the same position, but he didn't dare move. He'd committed to this test and he was going to see it through. The woman's footsteps came back toward the study. He could see her shadow in the doorway. She stood there for a long moment, just watching him. His heart pounded in his chest. What was she thinking? What was she about to do? Then she moved into the room. Quietly, carefully, like she was afraid of waking him. The rancher's mind raced. This was it. This was when he'd find out if his suspicions were right. He'd left his wallet on the desk. There was cash in it. Not a huge amount, but enough to tempt someone who needed money. Through the tiny slits of his eyes, he watched her approach the desk. She was carrying something. He couldn't quite make out what it was. His pulse thundered in his ears so loud he was sure she could hear it. But she didn't go for the wallet. Instead, she set something down on the desk. Then she bent down, and he realized she was picking something up from the floor near his chair. His reading glasses. He'd dropped them earlier and forgotten about them. She held them gently, pulled a cloth from her apron pocket, and cleaned them carefully before placing them on the desk right next to where she'd put whatever she was carrying. The rancher's anger began to fade, replaced by confusion. This wasn't what he'd expected at all. The woman stood there for another moment looking at him. Her expression, from what he could barely see, seemed sad. Not sneaky or calculating, just sad, like she understood something he didn't. She turned and walked toward the living room again. He heard more soft sounds. Was she dusting? It sounded like she was cleaning the picture frames on the walls. He'd let those get dusty over the past 2 years. His wife had always kept them spotless, but he couldn't bring himself to do it. Each photo was a memory, and touching them hurt too much. More minutes passed. The rancher found himself relaxing despite his intention to stay alert. There was something peaceful about the sounds of someone caring for his home. Not just cleaning it, but truly caring for it. He could hear the gentleness in how she moved things, how she set them back down. His eyes grew heavier. No, he couldn't actually fall asleep. That would defeat the whole purpose of the test. He needed to stay awake, stay aware, keep watching. But the day had been long. He'd barely slept the night before, worrying about this whole situation. And the chair was comfortable. And the house was warm. And those soft sounds of someone moving around, taking care of things, reminded him of better times, safer times. His breathing, which he'd been controlling carefully, started to become naturally deep and slow. His muscles, which he'd been keeping carefully loose, actually relaxed. His mind, which had been racing with suspicion and worry, began to quiet. Just for a minute, he told himself. Just rest for 1 minute, then get back to watching. The woman came back past the study door. She paused again, looking at him. This time her look was different. Concerned, maybe. She disappeared for a moment, and he heard a closet door open down the hall. The linen closet, probably. Footsteps returned. Something soft draped over his shoulders and chest. A blanket. She'd gotten a blanket and covered him up. He felt her adjust it gently, making sure it wouldn't slip off. "Sleep well," she whispered. So quietly he almost didn't hear it. Then she turned off the bright overhead light, leaving only the small desk lamp on. The warm glow was much easier on the eyes, much more comfortable for sleeping. No, not for sleeping. For watching. He was supposed to be watching, but his eyes wouldn't open anymore. His body had decided it was done for the day. The stress of the past 2 years, the lonely nights, the constant worry, the grief that never quite went away, it all caught up with him at once. The woman's kindness, unexpected and genuine, had somehow made him feel safe enough to let his guard down. Within minutes, the rancher's fake sleep had become real sleep, deep, peaceful sleep, the kind he hadn't experienced since before his wife got sick. He'd meant to test her, to catch her in the act of showing her true character, and in a way he had, just not the way he'd expected. Not the way he'd feared. She'd shown him exactly who she was, and it left him completely defenseless. The rancher woke up slowly, confused about where he was. The study was dim, lit only by the small desk lamp. His neck was stiff, and he had a blanket over him that he didn't remember getting. For a moment he thought his wife had covered him up like she used to do when he fell asleep reading. Then reality crashed back. His wife was gone. This was the present, not the past. He sat up and the blanket slid down into his lap. It was the soft blue one from the hall closet, the one his wife had bought years ago. He touched it, memories flooding through him. How long had he been asleep? He checked his watch. Over an hour. Maybe closer to 90 minutes, so much for his test. He'd meant to watch the new helper, to see what she'd do when she thought he was sleeping. Instead, he'd actually fallen asleep. Some detective he was, but wait, the blanket. His glasses on the desk. The light had been changed. She'd done all that while he slept. What else had she done? The rancher stood up, his knees creaking. He was getting old, no point denying it. He folded the blanket and set it on the chair, then walked into the living room. He stopped in the doorway, surprised. The room looked different. It took him a moment to figure out why. Everything was clean. Not just surface clean, but properly cleaned. The picture frames on the walls were dust-free and gleaming. The books on the shelves were straightened. The coffee table was polished. The pillows on the couch were arranged neatly, but it was more than that. Things had been moved, but not randomly. They'd been put in the right places. His wife's places. The decorative bowl she loved was back in the center of the coffee table, not shoved to the side. The photo album that had somehow ended up on the floor behind the bookshelf was now on the shelf where it belonged. The TV remote was in the basket on the side table instead of lost between the couch cushions. The rancher walked slowly through the room, noticing details. The curtains had been adjusted to hang evenly. A plant he'd forgotten to water was now moist, probably saved just in time. The fireplace tools were back in their stand instead of scattered on the hearth. Then he saw something that made him stop breathing for a second. On the mantel, there was a photo of him and his wife from their wedding day, 32 years ago. They'd been so young, so happy, so sure their life together would last forever. After she died, he'd turned that photo face down. He couldn't look at it. It hurt too much to see them that young and full of hope, knowing how the story ended. The photo was standing upright now. Someone had turned it back around, the woman. She'd done this. While he slept, while he was supposed to be testing her, she'd been quietly taking care of his home. Taking care of his memories. He walked into the kitchen, his mind spinning. On the counter, he found a note written in neat handwriting on a piece of scrap paper. You seem tired. The ranch books are on your desk. I noticed some filing that needs doing. I can help tomorrow if you'd like. Sleep well. The rancher picked up the note and read it again. No signature, but she didn't need one. The message was simple, practical, kind. She wasn't asking for extra pay for the filing work. She wasn't complaining about finding him asleep. She was just offering to help. He walked back to his study and looked at his desk. Sure enough, there were the ranch books. The records and receipts he'd been meaning to organize for months. They were stacked neatly, with a few folders beside them ready for filing. His glasses were placed where he could easily reach them. Next to the glasses was the thing she'd been carrying earlier, the old photo album that had fallen behind the bookshelf. He opened the album and felt his throat get tight. Pictures of his children when they were small, his wife young and beautiful holding their first baby, birthday parties, Christmas mornings, school plays. All the moments that made up a life, a family, a history. How long had this album been lost behind that bookshelf? Months, maybe even a year. He'd looked for it once, but given up, figuring it would turn up eventually. And now here it was, dusted off and returned to him. The rancher sat down in his chair, the album open on his lap. He felt ashamed. He'd set up this whole test to catch her doing something wrong. He'd left out valuables hoping to tempt her into stealing. He'd pretended to sleep to see if she'd show her true colors. And what had she done? She'd cleaned his house, fixed things that were broken or misplaced, taken care of him by covering him with a blanket and dimming the harsh lights. She'd treated his home and his belongings with respect and care. She'd even turned that wedding photo right side up, probably not knowing the pain it would cause him to see it. Except it didn't cause pain. Not this time. This time, looking at that young couple on their wedding day, he felt something different. Gratitude, maybe, for having had 30 years with a woman he loved. 30 good years. Yes, losing her hurt terribly, but having had her at all was a gift. The woman hadn't stolen anything. She hadn't snooped through his personal papers. She hadn't made long-distance phone calls or helped herself to his liquor cabinet. She hadn't done any of the things he'd been afraid she might do. Instead, she'd done something he hadn't expected at all. She'd brought life back into his house. Just a little bit. Just enough to remind him that there was still beauty in the world. Still kindness, still people who did good things simply because they were good people. He heard a door close softly down the hall. Her room. She'd gone to bed, giving him privacy in his own home, not hovering or trying to make conversation, just quietly doing her job and then stepping back. The rancher looked around his study. At the organized books, the clean surfaces, the found album, the carefully placed glasses. He thought about the living room with its straightened pictures and rescued plant. He thought about the wedding photo standing proud on the mantel again. He'd tested her, all right. But the test had revealed more about him than about her. It showed him how much fear he'd been carrying, how much he'd let one bad experience color his view of everyone else, how he'd been expecting the worst from people instead of hoping for the best. The woman had passed his test with flying colors, but he wasn't sure he'd passed his own test. What kind of person set traps for someone who was just trying to make a living? Someone who'd lost their spouse just like he had? Someone who was probably scared and lonely and hoping this new job would work out? He felt small, mean, suspicious in the worst way. Tomorrow, he decided, he'd do better. He'd give her the benefit of the doubt she deserved. He'd treat her with the same respect she'd shown his home and his memories, but he wouldn't tell her about the test. That was too embarrassing to admit. He'd just move forward and try to be a better person, a better boss, maybe even a better human being. The rancher closed the photo album and placed it carefully on the shelf where it belonged. He turned off the desk lamp and headed to his own room. As he passed her door, he noticed a light still on underneath it. She was probably reading or maybe writing letters. He didn't hear any TV sounds. No phone conversations, just quiet. He climbed into his own bed, tired but oddly peaceful. For the first time in 2 years, his house felt less empty, less cold, less like a museum of his past and more like a place where life could still happen. He'd fallen asleep during his test, which meant he'd failed as a spy. But maybe, just maybe, he'd succeeded at something more important. He'd found someone who could help him remember how to live again. The next morning came with bright sunshine and the smell of coffee. The rancher opened his eyes and realized he'd slept through the entire night without waking up once. That hadn't happened in ages. Usually he woke up at 2 or 3 in the morning and lay there thinking about everything and nothing until dawn. He got dressed and walked toward the kitchen, following the smell of coffee and something else. Bacon? Was that bacon? And fresh bread? The woman was at the stove, her back to him, humming that same gentle tune from yesterday. The kitchen was filled with morning light, and the table was set for one. She'd put out a placemat, silverware, a napkin, and a small vase with wildflowers. Where had she found wildflowers in September? "Good morning," he said, and she turned with a smile. "Good morning. I hope you slept well. Coffee's ready and breakfast will be done in just a minute." "You didn't have to do all this," he said, gesturing at the table. "A simple breakfast is fine." "I know," she said, turning back to the stove. "But it's nice to cook for someone again. I missed it." He poured himself coffee and sat down at the table. Through the window, he could see his ranch hands already at work in the distance. The morning shift always started early. He should probably be out there with them, but lately he'd been letting his foreman handle most of the day-to-day operations. The woman brought over a plate with scrambled eggs, bacon, and toast. The toast was golden brown and buttered perfectly. Real butter, not margarine. She must have found the good stuff in the back of the fridge. "This looks wonderful," he said. "Aren't you eating?" "I ate earlier," she replied. "I'm an early riser. Always have been." As he ate, she moved around the kitchen, cleaning up the cooking mess, wiping down counters, staying busy. He wanted to tell her to sit down, to relax, but he got the sense that staying busy was how she dealt with things. He understood that. He'd done the same thing after his wife died. Worked himself half to death just to avoid sitting still with his thoughts. "I saw the ranch books on my desk," he said between bites. "The note said you could help with the filing?" "Only if you want," she said. "I noticed things were a bit behind. I used to do bookkeeping for my husband's business. It's not fancy work, but I know my way around receipts and ledgers." "That would be helpful," he admitted. "I've been putting it off for months. Maybe longer." She nodded, understanding in her eyes. She didn't say what they both knew, that he'd been putting off a lot of things since his wife died. That the whole ranch, the whole house, had been slowly falling into gentle chaos because he didn't have the energy or the will to keep up with it all. After breakfast, they went to his study together. She pulled up a chair next to his desk and started going through the papers. Her hands were quick and efficient, sorting things into piles, making notes, asking occasional questions. "This receipt from the feed store, did you want to keep this for taxes?" "Yes, business expense." "And this one from the vet?" "Same." They worked like that for an hour, falling into an easy rhythm. She didn't criticize his messy system or lack of organization. She just quietly fixed it, asking questions when needed, making suggestions when appropriate. At one point, she pulled out a stack of old papers and paused. "These look personal," she said. "Should I leave them for you to sort?" He glanced over. They were sympathy cards from when his wife died. Dozens of them. He'd saved them all but never knew what to do with them. "I don't know," he said honestly. "I feel like I should keep them, but I don't know where." She thought for a moment. "What if we got a memory box? You could keep cards, photos, special items all in one place. That way they're saved but not scattered around, making you stumble over them unexpectedly." It was a good idea. A kind idea. She wasn't telling him to throw away his grief or get over it. She was just suggesting a way to honor it without letting it control his entire house. "That sounds good," he said. They worked until lunch, getting more done than he'd accomplished in months. She made sandwiches and they ate on the back porch looking out over the ranch. The cattle were grazing in the far pasture. The mountains rose up in the distance, their peaks already dusted with early snow. "It's beautiful here," she said quietly. "Peaceful." "It is," he agreed. "My grandfather built this ranch from nothing. My father expanded it. I've just tried to keep it going." "That's not nothing," she said. "Keeping something going is hard work. Especially when life gets hard." He looked at her. "You understand that?" "I do." She was quiet for a moment. "After my husband died, people kept telling me to move on. To sell the house, start over somewhere new. But that felt like erasing him, like admitting he never existed. "So why did you leave?" he asked. "Why come here?" She smiled sadly. "Because staying in the same place with all the same people was keeping me stuck in the same pain. I needed something different. Not to forget him, but to remember that I'm still alive, that my life didn't end just because his did. The rancher felt those words hit him right in the chest. That was exactly what he'd been doing. Acting like his life had ended with his wife's. Going through the motions but not really living. "I'm sorry about your husband," he said. "I'm sorry about your wife," she replied. They sat in comfortable silence for a while. Two people who understood loss in a way others couldn't. Not the people who said time heals all wounds or they're in a better place now. Those people meant well, but they didn't understand that some wounds don't heal. They just become part of who you are. That afternoon, the rancher found himself confessing things he hadn't told anyone. About how guilty he felt for being angry at his wife for dying, about how his children wanted him to sell the ranch and move closer to them, but he couldn't bear to leave, about how he sometimes forgot she was gone and turned to tell her something before remembering. The woman listened without judgment, without trying to fix him, without offering empty platitudes. She just listened. And sometimes she shared her own stories, about her husband's last days, about the well-meaning friends who disappeared after the funeral, about the financial struggles of widowhood that nobody talks about. By evening, something had shifted between them. They weren't just employer and employee anymore. They were two people who'd survived terrible losses and were trying to figure out how to keep going. As she prepared dinner, the rancher watched her move around the kitchen with easy familiarity. In just 2 days, she'd made the place feel like a home again. Not his old home, that was gone forever, but a new kind of home. Different, but still good. He thought about his test from the first night. How he'd pretended to sleep to catch her doing something wrong. How stupid that seemed now. He'd been so focused on protecting himself from being hurt again that he'd almost missed the chance to let someone help him heal. The woman set the table and called him to dinner. As they sat down to eat, the rancher realized something important. Sometimes the tests we set for others reveal more about ourselves than about them. He'd been testing her honesty, but what he'd really learned was that he needed to test his own willingness to trust again. And maybe, just maybe, he was ready to pass that test. He still hadn't told her about that first night, about his suspicions and his silly spy game. That secret felt heavy, like it was sitting on his chest making it hard to breathe. But he wasn't quite ready to confess yet. What if she got angry? What if she quit? What if his foolishness ruined the first good thing that had happened to him in 2 years? So he kept quiet and ate his dinner and told himself that some secrets were better kept, at least for now. But deep down he knew the truth. Good relationships, whether friendship or employment or anything else, couldn't be built on deception. Not even well-intentioned deception, not even tests designed to protect oneself. Sooner or later he'd have to come clean, and when he did, he just hoped she'd understand. 3 weeks passed, and the ranch settled into a new rhythm. The woman was up before dawn every morning, coffee brewing before the rancher even got out of bed. The house smelled like fresh bread more often than not. She'd found his grandmother's old bread recipe in a dusty cookbook and made it her own. The rancher found himself looking forward to mornings, not just for the food, though that was certainly part of it, but for the quiet conversations over coffee, the way she'd mention something she'd read in the paper and ask his thoughts, the way she actually listened to his answers instead of just waiting for her turn to talk. She'd transformed the house in small ways. Nothing dramatic. She hadn't redecorated or rearranged furniture without permission. But things were cleaner, more organized, more lived in. Plants that had been dying were now thriving on windowsills. Windows that hadn't been properly cleaned in years now let in clear light. The kitchen had become the heart of the home again, always warm, always smelling of something good. But it was more than just the housework. She'd brought something intangible back into the place. Life, maybe. Hope. The sense that the future might hold something besides just getting through another day. The rancher started paying more attention to ranch business again. With the household running smoothly, he had mental energy for other things. He spent more time with his foreman, discussing cattle prices and feed costs and which pastures needed rotation. He fixed a fence section that had been sagging for months. He even started planning for next year's calving season. His children noticed the change. His daughter called one Sunday afternoon, and he actually felt like talking to her instead of making an excuse to get off the phone quickly. "You sound good, Dad," she said, surprise in her voice. "Really good. Is the new helper working out?" "She is," he said. She's been a big help. I'm so glad. We were worried about you. I know. I'm sorry I made you worry. After he hung up, he found the woman in the laundry room folding clean towels. That was my daughter, he said. She says I sound better. The woman smiled. That's good. You should call her more often. I bet she misses hearing from you. Do you have kids? He asked, realizing he'd never thought to ask. One daughter. She's in Seattle, finishing graduate school. 26 years old and so smart it scares me sometimes. Pride filled her voice. You must miss her. Every day. But she's building her life, and that's what parents want. We raise them to leave us. She laughed a little, even when it breaks our hearts. The rancher learned more about her over the following days. She'd been married for 23 years. Her husband had been a good man, a mechanic who owned his own shop. They'd been happy, not wealthy, but comfortable. Then the cancer came and everything changed. The medical bills were brutal, she said one evening as they worked together in the study. He'd taken to asking for her help with the ranch books. She had a good head for numbers and caught mistakes he'd missed. Insurance covered most of it, but not all. We had to sell the business to pay for his last few months of care. I'm sorry, the rancher said. Don't be. He got to die at home in his own bed with people who loved him nearby. That was worth every penny. She paused, looking at the ledger in front of her, but it left me broke. That's life, I guess. He noticed she sent most of her paycheck away. He'd seen the envelopes addressed to Seattle, her daughter's name written in careful handwriting. When he casually mentioned it, she admitted her daughter was struggling with student loan debt. She took out loans to pay for school so we wouldn't have to help her, the woman explained. But now she's drowning in debt and I can help, so I do. You're a good mother, he said. I'm trying to be. The rancher started seeing her differently, not as hired help, but as a person with her own struggles and sacrifices. A woman who'd lost everything and was quietly rebuilding, not with complaints or demands for sympathy, but with hard work and generosity toward the daughter she loved. One night, a pipe burst in her quarters. He woke up around 2 a.m. to strange sounds. When he investigated, he found her in her bathroom, ankle-deep in water, using towels to contain the flood. Why didn't you wake me? He demanded. It's not that bad, she said, though she was clearly exhausted. I found the shut-off valve. The water's stopped now. I'll clean this up and call a plumber in the morning. You should have gotten me. You need your sleep. He helped her clean up the water, ignoring her protests. Together, they mopped and dried and moved her belongings to a guest room for the night. She was embarrassed, apologizing repeatedly, as if a pipe bursting was somehow her fault. The next morning, he found her in the barn at 6 a.m., looking up plumbing supplies on her phone. What are you doing? He asked. I can fix it myself, she said. I helped my husband with repairs all the time. I just need to get the right parts. You don't have to do that. I know, but plumbers are expensive. I can handle it. He realized something then. She'd been taking care of problems quietly, behind the scenes, not bothering him with issues she could handle herself. How many other things had she fixed or dealt with without mentioning them? How much had she been doing to make his life easier, while asking for nothing in return? Let me call the ranch plumber, he said. He owes me a favor. I really can. I know you can. But you don't have to. That's what I'm learning. Just because you can do everything yourself doesn't mean you should have to. She looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. Okay, thank you. The plumber came that afternoon and fixed the pipe. Turned out it was an old connection that had finally given way. Could have happened to anyone. The rancher made sure the man did a thorough check of all the plumbing in that part of the house, wanting to prevent future problems. As the weeks turned into a month, then 6 weeks, the rancher found his perspective shifting even more. He'd hired her to take care of the house, but she was taking care of so much more than that. She'd ask him about his day and actually care about the answer. She'd notice when he was tired or troubled and make his favorite meal without asking. She'd leave books on his desk that she thought he'd enjoy, and he'd find himself actually reading again for the first time in years. She had a quiet strength about her. She didn't complain or seek attention. She just did what needed doing with grace and competence. When ranch hands came to the house for various reasons, she treated them with respect, learning their names, asking about their families. When delivery drivers showed up, she'd offer them water or coffee. She made everyone feel seen and valued. The rancher started asking her opinion on things beyond household matters. What did she think about the new feed supplier? Did she have any ideas for cutting costs without sacrificing quality? Should he sell off some of the older equipment or try to fix it up for another few years? Her answers were thoughtful and practical. She had good instincts and wasn't afraid to speak her mind, but she did it respectfully. She'd say, "Well, I don't know much about ranching, but," and then offer insights that showed she understood more than she gave herself credit for. One evening, they were sitting on the porch watching the sunset. The temperature was dropping, fall turning toward winter. Soon the hard months would come, the months when ranching was just survival and cold and making it through to spring. "Thank you," he said suddenly. She looked at him, surprised. "For what?" "For everything. For making this house feel like a home again. For caring about things, for—" He struggled for words. "For being here." She was quiet for a moment. "You gave me a job when I needed one. A place to stay. A chance to rebuild. I should be thanking you." "It's more than that," he said. "You didn't have to care as much as you do. You could just do the minimum and collect your paycheck. But you don't, you really care." "That's just who I am," she said simply. "I don't know how to do things halfway." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun disappeared behind the mountains. The rancher thought about the test he'd given her that first night. What a fool he'd been. What a suspicious, guarded fool. She'd passed his test so thoroughly that she'd made him ashamed of having tested her at all. He still hadn't told her about it. The secret sat heavy in his chest, a weight he carried every day. Every time she did something kind or thoughtful, the guilt grew stronger. She deserved to know. She deserved his honesty, just as she'd given him hers. But fear kept him quiet. Fear of losing this new friendship. Fear of seeing disappointment in her eyes. Fear that the truth would ruin everything good that had grown between them. So he said nothing and hated himself a little bit more each day for his cowardice. 3 months had passed since the woman arrived at the ranch. Winter was settling in properly now. Frost on the ground in the mornings, cattle needing extra feed to stay warm. The rancher found himself dreading the cold months less this year. The house was warm and welcoming, and there was always someone to talk to when the long winter evenings stretched out. But the secret was eating at him. Every morning when she greeted him with coffee and a smile, he felt it. Every evening when they sat down to dinner together, he felt it. Every time she did something kind or thoughtful, which was basically every day, the guilt pressed harder against his chest. He'd been lying to her through omission. Well, not lying exactly, but not telling the whole truth either. And wasn't that the same thing? The decision came on a Tuesday morning. Nothing special about the day, just gray skies and cold wind. They were having coffee at the kitchen table, and she was telling him about a letter from her daughter. Good news. The daughter had gotten a part-time job that would help with expenses. "I'm so proud of her," the woman said. Her face lit up with joy. She works so hard. Never complains. Just keeps pushing forward. "She gets that from you," the rancher said. The woman smiled. Maybe. Her father was like that too. Strong and steady no matter what life threw at him. And suddenly the rancher couldn't hold it in anymore. The words came tumbling out before he could stop them. "I need to tell you something. Something I did when you first got here. Something I'm not proud of." She set down her coffee cup, her expression concerned. "What is it?" So he told her. Everything. About his fear and suspicion. About the previous helper who'd stolen from him. About leaving valuables out as bait. About pretending to sleep that first night to see what she'd do when she thought no one was watching. The words felt ugly coming out of his mouth. Each sentence made him feel smaller, meaner, more ashamed. He couldn't look at her face. He stared at his coffee cup instead, watching the surface of the liquid ripple slightly with his shaking hands. When he finished, there was silence. Long, heavy silence. Finally, he forced himself to look up at her. She wasn't angry. She wasn't crying. She wasn't packing her bags or yelling or any of the reactions he'd feared. She was just looking at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Sad maybe. Understanding possibly, I know, she said quietly. He blinked. "What? I know?" "I knew that first night." "How?" "I saw your reflection in the window glass over the sink. Your eyes weren't quite closed, and your breathing was too controlled, too even. People who are really asleep don't breathe that perfectly." The rancher felt his face go hot with embarrassment. "You knew? This whole time?" "This whole time. Why didn't you say anything?" She took a sip of her coffee, thinking about her answer. "Because I understood why you did it. You'd been hurt before. You were protecting yourself. That's not wrong, it's just human, but "Let me finish," she said gently. "My late husband's family never trusted me. They thought I married him for his money, which was ridiculous because he wasn't wealthy. He had a decent business and a nice house, but he wasn't rich. Still, they watched me like hawks. Every visit, every holiday, they were looking for proof that I was some kind of gold digger. She stared out the window at the gray sky. When he got sick, it got worse. They questioned every decision I made about his care. They hinted that I was trying to speed up his death to get the inheritance. Never mind that I was the one sitting up with him at night, giving him his medications, bathing him, changing his clothes. Never mind that I loved him more than life itself. The rancher felt a deep ache in his chest. I'm sorry. After he died, she continued, I expected them to finally see the truth. But they didn't. They fought me over the will, accused me of manipulating him. It took 6 months to settle everything, and by the end, his whole family had cut me off. I lost my husband and his entire family in one blow. That's terrible. It taught me something, though. She looked back at him. People who've been hurt sometimes hurt others, not because they're bad people, but because they're scared. Your test wasn't about me. It was about protecting yourself from being hurt again. I understood that. You're more understanding than I deserve, he said. Maybe. Or maybe I just know what it's like to have people doubt you for no good reason. I figured you needed to see who I was on your own terms. Telling you I knew about the test would have just made things awkward. They sat in silence for a moment. The rancher felt a strange mix of relief and shame. Relief that she knew and hadn't left. Shame that he'd doubted her in the first place. I'm sorry, he said again. It was wrong. I should have given you a fair chance from the start. You did give me a fair chance. You just needed some insurance first. I don't blame you for that. You should. Why? Because you're human? Because you've been hurt and learned to be careful? She shook her head. That's not a crime. That's survival. The rancher thought about his late wife. She would have handled this with the same grace. She would have understood his fear and forgiven his suspicion. Maybe that was why he'd felt drawn to this woman from the start. She had the same kind of strength his wife had possessed. The strength that came from surviving hard things and choosing to stay kind anyway. I left valuables out, he admitted. Trying to tempt you? I know. I saw the cash in the unlocked drawer when I was looking for dish towels. I saw the jewelry box that wasn't quite hidden. I knew what you were doing. And you didn't take anything. Of course not. That's not who I am, she paused. But I understood why you needed to know that. When I fell asleep that night, actually fell asleep, I failed my own test. She smiled then, a real smile. No, you passed a different test. You let yourself feel safe enough to rest. That's important too. They finished their coffee in comfortable silence. The rancher felt lighter than he had in months. The secret was out. She knew she'd always known, and she was still here, still treating him with kindness and respect. Thank you, he said, for understanding, for staying, for everything. You're welcome. And thank you for telling me. I know that wasn't easy. It wasn't, but it needed to be said. She stood up and started clearing the coffee cups. So are you done testing me? Or should I expect more spy games? He laughed, actually laughed for the first time in recent memory. No more tests. I promise, causing good, because honestly, you're not very good at it. That fake sleep was pretty obvious. Hey now, he protested, but he was grinning. She grinned back, just being honest. As she washed the cups, the rancher sat at the table thinking about trust and honesty and second chances. He'd been given a second chance by this woman, though he hadn't deserved it. She could have quit that first week when she realized what he'd done. She could have been angry or hurt or insulted. Instead, she'd chosen to understand, to stay, to help him heal. Can I ask you something? He said. Of course. Why did you really stay? After you figured out what I was doing? Why not leave and find a better job with someone who'd trust you from the start? She was quiet for a moment, her hands still in the soapy water. Because I needed this job, and because I saw something in you that reminded me of myself. Someone who'd lost something precious and was trying to figure out how to keep going. I thought maybe we could help each other. Have we? Helped each other, I mean. She turned to look at him, her hands dripping soap suds onto the floor. What do you think? He thought about the past 3 months. About how the house felt like a home again. About how he'd started caring about the ranch. About his future. About more than just getting through each day. About how he'd laughed again, really laughed. About how he looked forward to mornings instead of dreading them. Yes, he said. We have. Then that's your answer. She turned back to the dishes and he sat there feeling grateful. Grateful for her kindness. Grateful for her understanding. Grateful that sometimes when you're brave enough to tell the truth, people surprise you with grace instead of judgment. The secret was out, and everything was going to be okay. Better than okay, actually, because now their friendship was built on honesty instead of hidden guilt, and that made all the difference. 3 months had passed since the woman arrived at the ranch. Winter was settling in properly now, frost on the ground in the mornings, cattle needing extra feed to stay warm. The rancher found himself dreading the cold months less this year. The house was warm and welcoming, and there was always someone to talk to when the long winter evenings stretched out. But the secret was eating at him. Every morning when she greeted him with coffee and a smile, he felt it. Every evening when they sat down to dinner together, he felt it. Every time she did something kind or thoughtful, which was basically every day, the guilt pressed harder against his chest. He'd been lying to her through omission. Well, not lying exactly, but not telling the whole truth either. And wasn't that the same thing? The decision came on a Tuesday morning. Nothing special about the day, just gray skies and cold wind. They were having coffee at the kitchen table, and she was telling him about a letter from her daughter. Good news. The daughter had gotten a part-time job that would help with expenses. "I'm so proud of her," the woman said. Her face lit up with joy. She works so hard. Never complains. Just keeps pushing forward. "She gets that from you," the rancher said. The woman smiled. Maybe her father was like that too. Strong and steady no matter what life threw at him. And suddenly the rancher couldn't hold it in anymore. The words came tumbling out before he could stop them. "I need to tell you something. Something I did when you first got here. Something I'm not proud of." She set down her coffee cup, her expression concerned. "What is it?" So he told her everything about his fear and suspicion, about the previous helper who'd stolen from him, about leaving valuables out as bait, about pretending to sleep that first night to see what she'd do when she thought no one was watching. The words felt ugly coming out of his mouth. Each sentence made him feel smaller, meaner, more ashamed. He couldn't look at her face. He stared at his coffee cup instead, watching the surface of the liquid ripple slightly with his shaking hands. When he finished, there was silence. Long, heavy silence. Finally, he forced himself to look up at her. She wasn't angry. She wasn't crying. She wasn't packing her bags or yelling or any of the reactions he'd feared. She was just looking at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Sad, maybe? Understanding, possibly. "I know," she said quietly. He blinked. "What? I know?" "I knew that first night." "How?" "I saw your reflection in the window glass over the sink. Your eyes weren't quite closed. And your breathing was too controlled, too even. People who are really asleep don't breathe that perfectly." The rancher felt his face go hot with embarrassment. "You knew? This whole time? This whole time? Why didn't you say anything?" She took a sip of her coffee, thinking about her answer. "Because I understood why you did it. You'd been hurt before. You were protecting yourself. That's not wrong, it's just human. But let me finish," she said gently. "My late husband's family never trusted me. They thought I married him for his money, which was ridiculous because he wasn't wealthy. He had a decent business and a nice house, but he wasn't rich. Still, they watched me like hawks. Every visit, every holiday, they were looking for proof that I was some kind of gold digger." She stared out the window at the gray sky. "When he got sick, it got worse. They questioned every decision I made about his care. They hinted that I was trying to speed up his death to get the inheritance. Never mind that I was the one sitting up with him at night, giving him his medications, bathing him, changing his clothes. Never mind that I loved him more than life itself." The rancher felt a deep ache in his chest. "I'm sorry." "After he died," she continued, "I expected them to finally see the truth. But they didn't. They fought me over the will, accused me of manipulating him. It took 6 months to settle everything, and by the end, his whole family had cut me off. I lost my husband and his entire family in one blow. That's terrible. It taught me something, though." She looked back at him. People who've been hurt sometimes hurt others. Not because they're bad people, but because they're scared. Your test wasn't about me. It was about protecting yourself from being hurt again. I understood that. "You're more understanding than I deserve," he said. "Maybe. Or maybe I just know what it's like to have people doubt you for no good reason. I figured you needed to see who I was on your own terms. Telling you I knew about the test would have just made things awkward. They sat in silence for a moment. The rancher felt a strange mix of relief and shame. Relief that she knew and hadn't left. Shame that he'd doubted her in the first place. "I'm sorry," he said again. "It was wrong. I should have given you a fair chance from the start." "You did give me a fair chance. You just needed some insurance first. I don't blame you for that. You should." "Why? Because you're human? Because you've been hurt and learned to be careful?" She shook her head. "That's not a crime. That's survival." The rancher thought about his late wife. She would have handled this with the same grace. She would have understood his fear and forgiven his suspicion. Maybe that was why he'd felt drawn to this woman from the start. She had the same kind of strength his wife had possessed. The strength that came from surviving hard things and choosing to stay kind anyway. "I left valuables out," he admitted, "trying to tempt you. I know. I saw the cash in the unlocked drawer when I was looking for dish towels. I saw the jewelry box that wasn't quite hidden. I knew what you were doing. And you didn't take anything." "Of course not. That's not who I am." She paused. "But I understood why you needed to know that. When I fell asleep that night, actually fell asleep, I failed my own test." She smiled then, a real smile. "No, you passed a different test. You let yourself feel safe enough to rest. That's important too." They finished their coffee in comfortable silence. The rancher felt lighter than he had in months. The secret was out. She knew. She'd always known. And she was still here, still treating him with kindness and respect. "Thank you," he said, "for understanding. For staying. For everything. You're welcome. And thank you for telling me. I know that wasn't easy. It wasn't. But it needed to be said." She stood up and started clearing the coffee cups. "So are you done testing me? Or should I expect more spy games?" He laughed, actually laughed for the first time in recent memory. "No more tests. I promise." "Good. Because honestly, you're not very good at it. That fake sleep was pretty obvious." "Hey now," he protested, but he was grinning. She grinned back, just being honest. As she washed the cups, the rancher sat at the table thinking about trust and honesty and second chances. He'd been given a second chance by this woman, though he hadn't deserved it. She could have quit that first week when she realized what he'd done. She could have been angry or hurt or insulted. Instead, she'd chosen to understand, to stay, to help him heal. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Of course. Why did you really stay? After you figured out what I was doing, why not leave and find a better job with someone who'd trust you from the start?" She was quiet for a moment, her hands still in the soapy water. "Because I needed this job, and because I saw something in you that reminded me of myself, someone who'd lost something precious and was trying to figure out how to keep going. I thought maybe we could help each other. Have we? Helped each other, I mean." She turned to look at him, her hands dripping soap suds onto the floor. "What do you think?" He thought about the past 3 months, about how the house felt like a home again, about how he'd started caring about the ranch, about his future, about more than just getting through each day, about how he'd laughed again, really laughed, about how he looked forward to mornings instead of dreading them. "Yes," he said, "we have." "Then that's your answer." She turned back to the dishes and he sat there feeling grateful. Grateful for her kindness. Grateful for her understanding. Grateful that sometimes when you're brave enough to tell the truth, people surprise you with grace instead of judgment. The secret was out, and everything was going to be okay. Better than okay, actually, because now their friendship was built on honesty instead of hidden guilt. And that made all the difference. 6 months had passed since the woman arrived at the ranch. Winter had turned to spring, and the land was coming back to life. Calves were being born, grass was greening up in the pastures, and the air had that fresh smell that only comes after months of cold and snow. The rancher stood on his porch, coffee in hand, watching the sunrise paint the mountains pink and gold. He heard the screen door open behind him and the woman joined him, her own coffee steaming in the cool morning air. "Beautiful morning," she said. "It is," he agreed. "Going to be a good day for checking the herd. I'll pack you a lunch. You don't have to." "I know. But I'm going to anyway," he smiled. They'd had this conversation before. She liked taking care of people, and he'd learned to accept it with grace instead of protest. Besides, her sandwiches were much better than the ones he made for himself. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the light change. The rancher thought about how different his life was now compared to 6 months ago. Back then, He'd been going through the motions, barely living, just surviving each day. Now he woke up with purpose, with something to look forward to, with someone to share his days with. His children had come to visit the month before, eager to meet the woman who'd made such a difference in their father's life. His daughter had pulled him aside during the visit. "Dad, she's wonderful. The house looks amazing. And you look," she'd gotten teary. "You look like yourself again." "I feel like myself again," he'd admitted. Is it just professional? Or is there something more? He'd thought about that question. Was there something more? He cared about her deeply, respected her, enjoyed her company. But romance? He wasn't sure. His heart still belonged to his late wife in many ways. And he didn't know if the woman felt anything beyond friendship and professional respect for him. "I don't know," he'd told his daughter honestly. "Right now, we're friends. Good friends. And that's enough," his daughter had smiled. Friends is a good place to start. Now, standing on the porch with the woman beside him, he wondered again about that question. But he didn't push it. Some things developed in their own time, and forcing them only ruined them. Later that morning, he was in the barn checking on a cow that had just given birth when he heard voices. Male voices, aggressive and demanding. He walked out to find two men at the main house, one of them banging on the door while the woman stood in the doorway blocking their entrance. The rancher hurried over. "Can I help you?" The larger man turned. "We're looking for her," he said, pointing at the woman. "She's got something that belongs to us." "I don't have anything of yours," the woman said calmly, though the rancher could see tension in her shoulders. "I've told you that before. My brother's watch, his ring, his tools. You sold everything before we could claim what was ours." The rancher understood immediately. These were her late husband's brothers. The family members who'd made her life hell after he died. "The will was clear," the woman said. "Everything went to me. The lawyers confirmed it. The courts confirmed it. He wasn't in his right mind when he wrote that will," the smaller brother said. "You manipulated him." "I think you need to leave," the rancher said, his voice hard. "This is private property and you're not welcome here." The larger brother stepped closer. "This doesn't concern you, old man. It concerns me when you show up on my property harassing my employee." "No, not my employee, my friend, my family." The woman looked at him, surprise and gratitude in her eyes. "Now," the rancher continued, "you can leave peacefully, or I can call the sheriff. Your choice." "We're not done with her," the larger brother said, but he was backing toward his truck. "Yes, you are," the rancher said firmly. "She's under my protection now. You want to bother her again? You'll have to go through me, and my lawyers, and I promise you my lawyers are meaner than yours." The brothers left, tires spitting gravel as they drove away too fast down the ranch road. The rancher watched until they were out of sight, then turned to the woman. She was trembling slightly, though trying to hide it. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine. Thank you. You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did. Nobody threatens my family." She smiled through her tears. "Family, you keep saying that. Because it's true. You've become family to me. Real family. The kind you choose, not just the kind you're born with." She wiped her eyes. "They've been harassing me for months. Showing up places, demanding things, making accusations. I thought moving here would end it, but they tracked me down." "They won't be back," he said confidently. "I meant what I said about the lawyers. I'll make some calls this afternoon. We'll get a restraining order if needed." "You'd do that for me?" "Of course I would. What kind of person would I be if I let someone hurt you?" She hugged him then, sudden and fierce. He was surprised for a moment, then hugged her back. They stood there in the morning sunshine, two people who'd found safety and acceptance in each other's presence. When they pulled apart, both of them were emotional. The rancher cleared his throat awkwardly. "Well, I should get back to checking those cattle, and I should start lunch prep." But neither of them moved for a moment. There was something unspoken hanging in the air between them, something that had been building for months. "I'm glad you're here," he said simply. "I'm glad I'm here too." That evening, the rancher made good on his promise. He called his lawyer and explained the situation. The lawyer, who'd handled the rancher's affairs for 30 years, immediately began working on legal protection for the woman. Within a week, official letters were sent, warning the brothers to cease all contact or face legal consequences. The annual ranch barbecue came in late June. It was a tradition going back to the rancher's grandfather, a big party for all the ranch hands, their families, neighbors, and friends. In recent years, the rancher had considered canceling it, The thought of hosting a party without his wife had seemed impossible, but this year the woman had convinced him to continue the tradition. "Your wife would want you to," she'd said. And the ranch hands look forward to it all year. So they'd planned together, ordered food, sent invitations. And now the day had arrived. The property was filled with people. Kids ran around playing games. Adults stood in groups talking and laughing. The smell of barbecue filled the air. Music played from speakers set up on the porch. The rancher stood watching it all, amazed at how alive his ranch felt. This was what it had been like when his wife was alive, full of life and laughter and community. He spotted the woman near the food tables, helping the cook, making sure everyone had enough to eat. A little girl, probably 5 years old, was tugging on her sleeve, asking something. The woman bent down to listen, then smiled and took the girl's hand, leading her toward the game area where other children were playing. She was so natural with people, so warm and genuine. Everyone gravitated toward her, drawn by her kindness and easy laughter. His foreman came up beside him, holding a beer. "You're a lucky man," he said. "I am. To have found her. She's special. The ranch hands love her. She remembers all their names, asks about their families. She's good for this place." "Good for you." The rancher nodded slowly. "She is. You going to marry her?" The question caught him off guard. "I don't know. Haven't really thought about it." The foreman gave him a knowing look. "Maybe you should think about it. Women like that don't come around often." After the foreman walked away, the rancher did think about it. Not marriage necessarily, but the future. What did he want? What did she want? They'd never really discussed it. They'd just been living day by day, enjoying each other's company, not planning too far ahead. Later, after the party wound down and the last guests had left, they cleaned up together. The woman was humming as she collected plates and cups, clearly happy and tired in that good way that comes from a successful event. "Thank you," the rancher said, "for pushing me to do this, for making it happen, for everything." "It was fun," she said. "Your wife would have been proud." "I think she would have liked you," he said. "I think you two would have been friends." The woman stopped what she was doing and looked at him. "That's one of the nicest things anyone's ever said to me." They finished cleaning as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. When everything was done, they sat on the porch steps, tired but content. "I've been thinking," the rancher said, "about the future, about what comes next, and I don't want things to change. I like how they are now. I like having you here. I like our routines and our conversations and just everything." "I like it too," she said softly. "But I also wonder if there could be more. Someday. Not now, necessarily. But eventually." She was quiet for a moment. "You mean romance?" "I mean partnership. Real partnership. Not employer and employee, not even just friends, but something more permanent." "I'd like that," she said. "When the time is right. When we're both ready." "No rush," he said. "No rush," she agreed. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars come out. The rancher felt at peace. Whatever the future held, whatever their relationship became, he knew one thing for certain. She'd saved him, not by doing anything dramatic or heroic, but by simply showing up every day and being exactly who she was, by being kind when he expected judgment, by being patient when he was difficult, by being present when he was lost. He'd tested her that first night, looking for reasons not to trust her,